We've covered the villains of the Disney Renaissance, so let's move over to the Disney experimental era. While nowhere near as impactful as the Renaissance that came before it, or the resurgence that followed, this era, made up of the studio's films of the 2000s, was an important time in their history. With the movies jumping in tone from adventure flicks to buddy comedies, this era had a lot of unique films, and that uniqueness is also true of the era's many villains. But of all the villains, which ones will be getting an easy sentence and which will be wishing they were that lucky? Hey guys, I'm Brad with WickedBinge, and this is Sentencing Disney Villains for Their Crimes, the Experimental Era, Part 1. While we are going to be focusing on the experimental era, there is one film from the Renaissance that we've yet to cover, so we thought we'd throw it in as a little bonus. All rise for the first film on the stand, Tarzan. The first evildoer is not a man, nor does he have much screen time. Still, this character plays a pivotal role in laying the foundations for the story. We're talking about the leopard, Sabor. As we said, Sabor doesn't do much, aside from killing Tarzan's parents. With those 2 counts of murder, we think it makes the most sense to give him the death penalty. How that will be carried out on something as vicious as Sabor is anyone's guess. But it is the most sensible decision, and also the most realistic. It shows you that even villains with only a couple of minutes of screen time can be just as dangerous as their more prominent counterparts. Now it's time to talk about Clayton, the real villain. Clayton appears to be a charming and charismatic man, but as the film evolves, so too does his character. He transforms from that depiction into an evil poacher who's only interested in money. He enacts a plan to capture gorillas and sell them. This makes him guilty of not only poaching, but also kidnapping and animal cruelty.
I've got some hunting to do.
He later kills Kerchak, Tarzan's father figure, and attempts to murder Tarzan, adding 2 more crimes to his sentence. With a total of 5 morbid crimes, we gotta go with the death penalty again. In the case of Clayton, we can more accurately assume how this punishment would be carried out. It seems likely that he would have been hung, as it was still commonplace in early 20th century England, the home to Clayton and the others on the voyage. Ironically, while he saw all animals as only brute savages, he has effectively earned the same punishment as that which he despises. Moving on to the actual experimental era, let's take a look at the villains from the comedic classic, The Emperor's New Groove. First is Yzma. Yzma has one goal, to take out Kuzco and install herself as the new emperor.
I'll get rid of Kuzco.
With this goal comes 2 crimes right off the bat. She's guilty of not only conspiring to overthrow a government official, but her attempts to kill Kuzco also means she has attempted murder. After becoming emperor, Isma abuses her power, another crime we can add to the growing list. You could argue that she's guilty of additional crimes, but we would say they all pale in comparison. On account of her attempt to overthrow her empire's regime, we think it would make the most sense to carry out the death penalty once again. Yzma's plan would not be taken lightly by the court of law, and that's true both in the period of the film and in modern day. During the days of the Aztec Empire, this punishment would have likely been carried out via stoning, but strangulation was also commonplace. Yzma might have hated her transformation into a cat, but let it be known, it could have been a lot worse. Next is Yzma's loyal and dim henchman, Kronk. Kronk's major offense is aiding Yzma in her quest to get rid of Kuzco and become emperor. This would make Kronk guilty of aiding and abetting. Beyond that, however, Kronk doesn't partake in many crimes, and even less independently of Yzma. While he does a lot on Yzma's behalf, he eventually turns against her and reform. Between his shift of loyalties and lack of crimes, we think we can safely pardon him. While Kronk was a major piece in Yzma's plans, he has reformed and has become a Squirrel Scout to better not only himself, but also the youth he interacts with.
My acorn is missing.
You can even argue this aspect of his character makes for good community service, if you really want to. So while Kronk isn't the most heroic or brightest in the Disney canon, compared to the characters we've looked at so far, and those to come, he definitely deserves a more lenient sentence. Our next character is not a villain. Or is he? Next is the film's protagonist, Emperor Kuzco. Kuzco might not be outwardly evil like Yzma is, but his actions are inarguably the reason much of the film happens. He's rude to everyone, will build locations on top of existing homes, and will even throw out his subjects if they throw off his groove.
When I give the word, your little town thingy will be bye-bye.
Independently, they aren't really crimes, but together, we can call this abuse of power. Kuzco cares little for law and order, instead worrying about how he feels and only how he feels. With one glaring criminal charge in mind, we believe Emperor Kuzco deserves 5 years in the slammer. You could make the argument his punishment should be more severe, but considering the arc he goes through over the course of the movie, we think it would be overkill. His evolution could get him an early release, but that remains to be decided. Either way, we're sure Kuzco would prefer that than being a llama. Next is the sci-fi adventure film Atlantis: The Lost Empire. First is Commander Rourke reporting for duty. Rourke is a lot like Clayton from Tarzan when you look at them closely. Much like Clayton, Rourke presents himself as a kindly man before showing his true colors as a benevolent and ruthless villain.
Plans changed, Doc.
Once the expedition team arrives in Atlantis, Rourke makes a move to take the city's resources. He kidnaps Kita and is also responsible for the death of the Emperor. He later goes to war with the Atlanteans, destroying countless airships and nearly kills Milo, while he only reveals himself as the villain in the final act. In that short amount of time, he's guilty of murder, attempted murder, terrorism, kidnapping, and theft. Considering all the crimes he unleashed on the people of Atlantis, Rourke, also like Clayton, receives the death penalty. Unlike Clayton, his punishment would be carried out in a vastly different way. Rourke would be subjected to poisonous gas unleashed in a cell, a relatively new form of punishment that was introduced in the early 20th century. Whether this is a better or worse fate than hanging is up to you. But what is certain is that it's a fate nobody wants. But on account for Rourke's crimes against humanity, we think this sentence is most appropriate. Next is Rourke's second-in-command, Helga Sinclair. Like Kronk, Helga doesn't get particularly involved in villainy of her own doing. Everything she does is on the orders of Commander Rourke. Also like Kronk, she eventually turns on her boss, although in her case it's done more to save her skin than out of heroism. On account of her role of almost bringing Atlantis to ruin, we think Helga should carry out a sentence of 50 years. Some will say Helga should serve even longer, but since the acts she commits are not quite as horrible as what Rourke does, we think 50 years is the best possible punishment. In the words of Rourke and herself, nothing personal. Now we have Lilo and Stitch. First is the mad scientist, Jumba. Jumba is an interesting character in that when we first meet him, he's already being sentenced for prior crimes. In his case, he's being sentenced on account of illegal experimentation. As the movie progresses, although he is an antagonist, the only charge we can add to this list is that of property damage.
You could do with a makeover.
After finding Stitch, they engage in a battle that wrecks much of Lilo's home. Between these two offenses, we think Jumba should receive 3 years in the doghouse. Since he does reform, and he doesn't have as many offenses as other villains we've covered today, we don't think it makes sense for him to get an extremely harsh sentence. But considering the damages caused on his quest to find Stitch, we think some type of punishment is necessary. Look on the bright side. Maybe our human years are only a few months in whatever species Jumba is. Next is the bounty hunter, Captain Gantu. Captain Gantu is tasked with capturing Stitch after it appears that Jumba implicitly failed. However, Gantu's mission leads him to commit a few crimes. Not only does he kidnap Lilo in the climax, but he also almost destroys both her and Stitch in the ensuing chaos.
We finish this now.
While he's only in the film briefly, Gantu has more crimes attached to his name than any other foe in the movie. On that account, we have to give this mercenary 15 years in prison. While you could say that Gantu was only doing his job, his attempt to kill Stitch and capture Lilo was not at all what he was told to do, showing that he had no problem disobeying orders. Even if he did follow them, the Grand Councilwoman ultimately goes back on her word, deciding to let Stitch go free rather than imprisoned. He wasn't in the film for that long, and he still caused that amount of chaos, so 15 years is appropriate. Next is a character who's not a straightforward villain, but not a classical hero either. It's time to talk about Stitch. Stitch's lack of allegiance and overall animalistic attitude is evidenced by the one and truly only crime he commits, which is property damage. Stitch repeatedly wreaks havoc all over Hawaii. From Lilo's house to the beach, no place is safe from this experiment. Luckily, Stitch eventually becomes a hero, saving Lilo from Gantu and returning her home.
Nobody gets left behind.
With that in mind, we think what Stitch needs is a few months of house arrest. At least enough time for him to be properly integrated and conditioned into society. Stitch might have saved the day, but it's undeniable that he's not very well behaved in public. To keep the community and himself safe, a few months at home is what he needs. The final movie of the day is Disney's second sci-fi epic, Treasure Planet. First to the stand is part cyborg but all pirate, Captain John Silver. As a pirate, one crime already can be added to Silver's sentence, that being piracy. As the crew sets sail for the much sought-after Treasure Planet, Silver also stages a mutiny, which ends in the capture of Jim Hawkins and his allies. Lastly, along with their aforementioned kidnapping, he steals the map to Treasure Planet.
You hates to lose.
With 4 crimes perpetrated throughout the movie, Silver seems to be a pretty villainous pirate. However, he reforms by the end of the film, and this is due in large part to a friendship that he forms with the young Jim Hawkins. Between his crimes and eventual redemption, we believe John Silver should serve a decade in prison, no more, no less. Silver's plan to find Treasure Planet causes a lot of terror, so we don't think his redemption completely absolves him. However, we don't think it prevents him from getting a potentially harsher sentence. So, while he might be spending a decade behind bars, we think this pirate will set sail soon enough. While John Silver has some charisma, the same cannot be said for one of his crewmates, Scroop. An alien with crab-like features, although he's subservient to Silver, he is the far more vicious villain of the two. Scroop is responsible for Mr. Arrow's death, which is blamed on Jim by many. To show how evil Scroop is compared to John, Silver was displeased with Scroop's decision and threatened to throw him overboard if a similar stunt was done again. Scroop also attempts to kill Jim at several points throughout the movie, and as a member of Silver's crew, he's additionally guilty of aiding and abetting, piracy, and mutiny. With so many crimes committed, we think Scroop deserves the death penalty. While we can only speculate on how such a punishment would be carried out in the far-off future, it's undoubtedly going to be an unpleasant experience. Well, an unpleasant fellow gets an unpleasant experience, wouldn't you agree? Alright guys, time for a recess. Let us know in the comments section if you agree with our choices, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.